When people observe the surviving architectural structures of the Roman Empire, the immediate visual evidence usually consists of white marble and massive stone arches. Observers picture the large Colosseum located in Italy, the domed ceiling of the Pantheon, or the spacious villas situated on the Mediterranean coast. Historical records often describe senators wearing clean white togas and emperors dining on imported food in temperate climates. This is the physical representation of Rome that dominates public perception. But for tens of thousands of Roman citizens and auxiliary soldiers living 2,000 years ago, the physical reality of the Roman Empire looked and felt completely different. The northernmost border of the Roman Empire was not constructed from marble. It was constructed from stacked turf, timber, rough-hewn stone, and it was located in an environment characterized by constant freezing rain. This was the province of Britannia, and specifically, the fortified military zone of Hadrian's Wall. Built on the direct orders of Emperor Hadrian starting in the year 122 AD, this massive defensive fortification stretched 73 miles across the narrow neck of northern England. It ran from the banks of the River Tyne near the North Sea in the east to the Solway Firth on the Irish Sea in the west. It was an enormous engineering project designed to physically separate the Roman province from the unconquered native tribes to the north. The initial construction of the wall was carried out by the heavily armored legionaries of the 3 Roman legions stationed in Britain, the 2nd Augustan, the 6th Victorious, and the 20th Valeria Victrix. The wall itself was a highly complex military zone. The main structure was built of stone in the eastern and central sections, and turf in the western section. The stone wall reached up to 15 feet high and 10 feet thick. In front of the wall lay a flat area of ground called a berm, followed by a V-shaped ditch measuring nearly 30 feet wide and 10 feet deep. Behind the wall ran the vallum, a massive earthwork consisting of a central ditch flanked by 2 large mounds of earth, designed to control access to the rear of the military zone. At intervals of exactly 1 Roman mile, roughly 1.5 kilometers, the army built a mile castle, which was a small fortified guard post. Between each mile castle stood 2 square observation turrets. However, the citizen legionaries who built this massive structure did not remain to defend it. The actual daily defense of the frontier was assigned to the auxiliary units. Their daily life took place inside the massive military fortresses attached directly to the wall, or built just slightly south of it along the Staingate supply road, such as the widely studied fort of Vindolanda. To understand the extreme physical disparity of life on this freezing frontier, we must first look at the very bottom of the military hierarchy. The lowest tier of this existence was occupied by the auxiliary soldiers. These were non-citizen recruits drawn from conquered provinces, such as modern-day Belgium, Germany, or Syria, stationed in northern Britain to defend a territory that was completely foreign to them. For the average auxiliary infantryman, the primary living space was the contubernium. This was a barrack room designed to house a military squad of 8 men. The barracks were long, rectangular stone or timber buildings divided into paired rooms. The front room, called the arma, was used to store their heavy iron armor, wet woolen cloaks, leather tents, and weaponry. The back room, called the papilio, was the sleeping quarters. In a physical space measuring roughly 10 by 15 feet, 8 adult men slept on the dirt floor or on low wooden bunks. There were no glass windows, only small unglazed openings, and a small hearth situated in the center for warmth and cooking. This architectural design meant the room was constantly filled with wood smoke that severely irritated the eyes and lungs of the occupants. The diet of these men was monotonous and required heavy manual labor to prepare. Each contubernium was issued a heavy stone hand mill. The soldiers had to manually grind their own daily grain rations to make a hard, unleavened bread or a thick boiled porridge. This basic carbohydrate diet was supplemented with salted pork, hard cheese, and a sour wine known as pasca. The persistent dampness of the British climate seeped into the porous stone and the timber walls, making the indoor air perpetually humid. The combined odors of 8 unwashed bodies, damp wool, animal fat used for waterproofing heavy leather boots, and constant wood smoke created a suffocating indoor atmosphere. The soldiers did everything possible to insulate their bodies against the bitter cold. The historical records retrieved from the site include direct written letters from family members sending winter clothing to the freezing troops. One specific document records a writer sending supplies to a soldier, listing pairs of heavy socks, 2 pairs of sandals, and 2 pairs of underpants. The fact that family members were shipping heavy socks and woolen underpants, known in Latin as a subligaculum, from other parts of the empire demonstrates exactly how desperate the men were to survive the freezing conditions of the watchtowers and barracks. Because Roman engineering is highly famous for its aqueducts and bathhouses, it is common to assume that these soldiers were provided with a high standard of hygiene. The forts along Hadrian's wall were indeed equipped with large communal latrines. These stone facilities featured long wooden benches with keyhole-shaped openings, built directly over a deep stone trench. A continuous stream of water, diverted from the fort's main water supply or from the bathhouse runoff, flowed continuously through the trench to flush away human waste. In front of the benches ran a shallow water channel, which the men used to rinse a tersorium, a communal sea sponge attached to a wooden stick used for personal cleaning. However, modern archaeological analysis of the sediment in the sewer drains at forts like Vindolanda reveals a grim biological reality. Researchers have analyzed coprolites, which are fossilized human feces recovered from the drains, and found extremely high concentrations of intestinal parasites. The common soldiers were heavily infected with roundworms, which grow up to 30 centimeters long inside the human digestive tract, and whipworms measuring about 5 centimeters. Furthermore, the soil samples showed the presence of the microscopic protozoan parasite Giardia duodenalis. This indicates that despite the advanced stone latrines and the running water, the complete lack of basic microbial understanding and the shared use of the communal sponge led to the constant contamination of their food, hands, and drinking water with human feces. The soldiers suffered from chronic dysentery, severe abdominal cramping, extreme fatigue, and continuous weight loss. The medical officers stationed at the fort had no effective medicinal treatments to clear these internal parasites. Therefore, the daily reality for the frontline auxiliary soldier was a miserable physical endurance against the freezing wind, constant dampness, and severe gastrointestinal illness. To escape these harsh physical conditions, a man needed to move up the rigid hierarchy of the Roman military. The Roman army operated on a strict system of social and professional ranks. Rank dictated every single aspect of physical existence: the specific food a person consumed, the clothes they wore, and the exact amount of physical space they were allocated inside the fortress walls. If you were a common soldier, you endured the cramped contubernium. If you were a centurion, commanding 80 men, you were granted a larger suite of private rooms at the far end of the barrack block, giving you physical separation from the noise and the immediate proximity of the enlisted men. But the true physical escape from the misery of the frontier was reserved for the highest rank of the auxiliary fort, the commanding officer. The fort commander had to be a man of equestrian rank. This was a specific social class in Rome, positioned directly below the senatorial elite. To qualify as an equestrian, a man had to be freeborn and legally possess property valued at a minimum of 400,000 sesterces. This extreme financial wealth and high birthright guaranteed that when an equestrian officer was deployed to the freezing edge of the empire in Britain, he did not have to leave his luxurious lifestyle behind. To observe this upper echelon of frontier life, we can examine the historical record of a specific man who lived it: Flavius Carialis. Around the year 100 AD, roughly 2 decades before the stone wall of Hadrian was completed, Carialis was the prefect, or commanding officer, of the 9th cohort of Batavians stationed at the fort of Vindolanda. The Batavians were an auxiliary unit originating from the region of the modern-day Netherlands, renowned for their specific cavalry skills. Carialis was an equestrian officer, and due to the highly unique soil conditions of the Vindolanda site, we possess direct physical evidence of his daily life. The earth at Vindolanda is highly anaerobic, meaning it lacks the oxygen required for bacteria to break down organic material. Because of this specific geological condition, archaeologists have excavated hundreds of thin, postcard-sized wooden leaf tablets covered in carbon-based ink. These are the Vindolanda tablets, comprising the personal and military correspondence of Flavius Carialis, his family, and his soldiers. The tablets were manufactured from thin slivers of alder and birch wood, scored vertically down the middle and folded face to face to protect the writing inside. The ink used was a fluid mixture of carbon soot, water, and gum arabic, applied with a fine metal or wooden pen. Through the translations of these physical documents, we can reconstruct the exact environment Carialis inhabited and the extreme lengths to which the Romans went to replicate Mediterranean luxury in northern England. When Flavius Carialis walked through his fort, he saw a highly organized, grid-like military installation. Roman forts were built to a standardized mathematical plan, shaped as a large rectangle with rounded corners, enclosed by a high timber or stone wall and deep defensive ditches. If Carialis entered through the Porta Praetoria, the massive double-portaled main gate, he would walk directly down the Via Praetoria, the main central street. He would pass the intervallum, the clear zone between the outer wall and the interior buildings used to move troops quickly and defend against incoming projectiles. The physical center of the fort was dominated by the Principia, the main headquarters building. This was the administrative and religious core of the entire fortress. The Principia was built around an open courtyard surrounded by colonnaded verandas on three sides. Beyond the courtyard stood a large basilica, a great hall consisting of a central nave and one side aisle. The large room was illuminated by clerestory windows, which were large openings set high up in the walls to let in natural light. At the left-hand end of the basilica was a raised stone platform called the tribunal. This was the precise physical location where Carialis would stand to issue official military orders, address the assembled garrison, or dispense military justice and punishments to the men of the 9th Batavians. At the rear of the Principia was a specific range of dedicated rooms. The central room was the Aedes, the sacred shrine of the military standards. This room was open at the front, separated from the main nave of the basilica by a low stone screen wall decorated with carved slabs of stone and fitted with an iron grille. Inside this shrine, the unit's military standards, flags, and religious altars dedicated to the Roman gods were securely kept under guard. The rooms located to either side of the Aedes served as the administrative offices for the adjutant, known as the cornicularius, and the standard bearers, the signiferi. The signiferi were strictly responsible for managing the unit's pay and handling any banking needs the soldiers required. The counters in these rooms were fitted with iron grill work to physically protect the clerks and the money. Beneath the stone floor of the Aedes, accessed by a short flight of stone stairs, was a subterranean strong room. This underground vault had extremely thick stone walls and held the physical currency, the silver denarii, used to pay the garrison their wages. Adjacent to the headquarters were the Heraea, the military granaries. These buildings were absolutely critical for the physical survival of the isolated garrison. A fort like Vindolanda held between 500 and 800 men, and military regulation required the fort to securely store enough grain to feed the entire garrison for a minimum of 6 months in case of a siege or a severe winter that blocked the supply lines. The Heraea were long, heavily built stone structures characterized by massive external stone buttresses. These thick stone supports were required to hold the structural weight of the tons of loose grain pressing outward against the interior walls. To prevent the grain from rotting in the damp, unforgiving British climate, the internal floors of the granaries were raised on small stone pillars or low parallel walls. The exterior walls contained narrow ventilation slots below the floor level. This specific architectural design allowed cold air to circulate continuously beneath the wooden floorboards, keeping the moisture and the local rodent population away from the primary food supply. Outside the defensive military walls of the fort, an entire civilian settlement developed, known as the vicus. The vicus housed the unofficial wives of the soldiers, their children, veteran soldiers who had completed their 25 years of service, merchants, blacksmiths, and tavern keepers. The scale of this civilian settlement was massive, turning the isolated military outpost into a densely populated frontier town. Blacksmiths forged iron nails for construction, potters produced coarse-ware ceramic vessels for cooking, and leatherworkers repaired the heavy hobnailed boots worn by the infantry. Thousands of discarded leather shoes have been excavated from the anaerobic mud outside the fort walls, ranging from heavy military boots to delicate indoor slippers and tiny children's shoes, proving that entire families lived in the immediate vicinity of the military walls. The soldiers would leave the strict confines of the military base during their off-duty hours to spend their wages in the vicus, buying better food, drinking beer, and utilizing the external bathhouse. The bathhouse was a large stone complex featuring a specific sequence of heated rooms. the frigidarium, a cold room with a pool, the tepidarium, a warm room used to acclimate the body, and the caldarium, a hot, steam-filled room. But while the common soldiers had to leave the fort to find warmth and better food in the civilian settlement, the commanding officer had all these physical luxuries built directly into his private residence. While the administrative and logistical buildings of the fort were impressive in their scale, the true physical manifestation of equestrian status was the praetorium, the commanding officer's residence. This was where Flavius Cerialis, his wife Sulpicia Lepidina, their children, and their extensive staff of personal enslaved workers lived. The praetorium was an enormous, sprawling house built in the direct style of a Mediterranean urban domus, placed right in the center of the fortress adjacent to the headquarters. It was designed around a private central courtyard to allow outdoor space away from the gaze of the common soldiers. The house contained a private dining room, private bathing facilities, and a dedicated, fully equipped indoor kitchen. In a landscape where the common soldier slept on a damp floor in a smoky, crowded barrack, the praetorium was equipped with a hypocaust, an advanced Roman central heating system. The floors of the main living spaces were suspended on stacks of square clay tiles called pilae. Outside the exterior walls of the building, enslaved workers constantly tended to a wood-fired furnace, known as the prefurnium. The hot exhaust smoke and gases from the furnace were drawn horizontally under the suspended floors and vertically up through hollow clay box tiles, known as tubuli, set directly into the walls before venting out through the roof. The heated stone floors and walls radiated constant clean heat into the rooms without producing any indoor smoke. This specific architectural intervention completely insulated Flavius Cerialis and his family from the brutal reality of the British weather. Inside the warm, dry walls of the praetorium, the lifestyle of the Mediterranean elite was maintained through an extensive and expensive global supply chain. The Vindolanda tablets provide an exact written inventory of the goods brought to the prefect's house. 2 fragments of a writing tablet contain a direct inventory of Sulpicia Lepidina's kitchen. The list records scutuli, which are shallow dishes, paropsides, which are side plates, and acetabula, which are vinegar bowls. Cerialis and his wife ate from fine red gloss Samian-ware ceramic bowls imported from southern Gaul. Their cooking staff prepared meals using olive oil imported from Spain, a fermented fish sauce called garum transported from Portugal, and black pepper shipped across the ocean from India. While the auxiliary soldiers outside suffered from severe dysentery and ate basic hard-ground grain rations, Cerialis drank imported wine and specialized beer. One of the surviving tablets is a letter from a cavalry decurion named Masculus directly to Prefect Cerialis. In the letter, Masculus reports on his men, asks for formal orders for the following day, and politely requests that more beer be sent to his outpost, explicitly stating that the garrison had entirely consumed its previous stock of beer. The social life of the commanding officer's family was also completely detached from the local environment. Sulpicia Lepidina received regular written correspondence from other elite women stationed at neighboring forts along the Stanigate Road. One of the most famous tablets recovered from the site is a letter from Claudia Severa, the wife of Aelius Brachus, an equestrian commander at another fort. The document is written in carbon-based ink on wood. The first part of the letter is written by a professional household scribe stating, "On the 11th of September, sister, for the day of the celebration of my birthday, I give you a warm invitation to make sure that you come to us, to make the day more enjoyable for me by your arrival." Then, at the very bottom of the tablet, Claudia Severa added a personal greeting in her own handwriting. "I shall expect you, sister. Farewell, sister, my dearest soul, as I hope to prosper and hail." This tiny, fragile piece of wood is one of the oldest known surviving examples of Latin handwriting composed by a woman. The men also engaged in leisure activities typical of the Roman aristocracy back in Italy. Another tablet shows Flavius Cerialis writing to Aelius Brachus stating, "If you love me, brother, I ask that you send me some hunting nets." Cerialis used the local landscape not as a hostile military frontier to be survived, but as a private hunting ground for sport, supported by his enslaved workers, his extreme wealth, and his imported equipment. The native Britons living around the fort were viewed with clinical disdain by the Roman officers. An anonymous writer in the tablets recorded a tactical observation of the local warriors, noting, "The Britons are unprotected by armor. There are very many cavalry. The cavalry do not use swords, nor do the wretched Britons mount in order to throw javelins." The elite Roman officers lived in a completely isolated environment of central heating, imported Indian spices, literary quotations from the Roman poet Virgil, and birthday parties. They were separated from the native population and their own freezing soldiers by high stone walls and strict social stratification. Yet the historical preservation of all this extreme luxury and detailed personal history is the direct result of a very mundane military practice. The Roman military was highly mobile. Around the year 105 AD, the garrison at Vindolanda received formal orders to relocate, or the timber fort was scheduled for a major demolition and reconstruction. When a Roman military unit moved, they did not transport unnecessary weight. They packed their weapons, their armor, the silver denarii from the strong room, and their valuable imported goods, but they discarded their refuse. The administrative records, the written reports on the native Britons, the requests for beer, the letters asking for hunting nets, and the delicate birthday invitations from elite women were all gathered together and thrown into the fort's external ditches and large bonfires. The wet, muddy conditions of the British climate, the very same dampness that caused such continuous physical misery for the common soldiers and required the construction of advanced hypocaust heating systems for the elite, intervened. The rain and the mud immediately sealed the discarded wooden tablets in a layer of oxygen-free earth, stopping the decomposition process. Flavius Carialis and his family packed up their imported Gaulish pottery and their Spanish olive oil and moved on to their next military posting, leaving their written lives behind in the dirt. The massive stone walls of the fortresses eventually collapsed. The Horia granaries were emptied, and the hypocaust furnaces went permanently cold. The strict military hierarchy that separated the freezing, sick auxiliary soldier from the warm, heavily perfumed equestrian commander dissolved entirely when the Roman Empire finally retreated from Britannia. But the mud remained. 2,000 years later, the primary reason we understand the precise engineering of the fortresses, the spread of intestinal parasites, and the stark social inequalities of daily life on Hadrian's wall is because the ultimate status symbols of the Roman elite were discarded as common refuse into the freezing British soil.